Hello and welcome to Teaching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am rejoined by guest interviewer Pranav Kale. Pranav, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. We should make this a regular thing. I really have fun doing these with you.
Cool. Yeah, I really appreciate the suggestion. You're in Ditcherville, and this is, I think, extra helpful because you're really familiar with my stuff. So you can ask non-surface level things, and we can drill into, like your area of expertise, helping people find their big idea. But before we do that, why don't you give folks a little bit of intro to who you are and what you do in case they didn't hear the previous episode?
Yeah, things have definitely evolved from the previous episode where I was operating more at a tactical level. I guess I was a LinkedIn ghostwriter, but now things have changed, and the current positioning statement that I run with is that I help soloists find their big idea. Because I truly believe that if you have a compelling message, then you organically created a differentiated brand. And once you have that, you no longer have to depend on algorithms, or you don't have to shout louder. You don't have to really obsess over your hooks and publishing timings. You can just focus on that particular message and attract an audience which resonates with it. And more importantly, you also repel the audience that does not resonate with it, because they will anyway not be a good fit for you as clients anyway. So yeah, that's what I do in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. You went from sort of tactical up to a strategic level, and I think that's great. Cool. Okay, so this was your idea to sort of have another reverse interview.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to? I mean, do you want to just jump right in? Or do you want to have any premise?
Yeah, the premise, like I said at the before we hit record, that I would love to know more about your big idea. I mean, of course, we know about ditching hourly, we know about hourly billing is nuts. So we know that, and we know the contents of it as well, because you have published enough on it. So that's been super helpful, and I think we are talking because of all the work that you did back then. But I think I'm more curious to explore how you arrived at this. And this is, I think, I'm a representative of a large chunk of an audience who struggle with getting to where you are. I would say largely that struggle is emotional. Maybe some of it is tactical, strategic, but largely it is emotional as well. So I would sort of represent them and try to uncover your journey and extract some learnings for them. So I think a good place to start would be, in case no one knows who you are or what your big idea is, maybe briefly setting the context as to what you actually mean by hourly billing is nuts, or any way you want to frame it. That would be a good start, and then I'll just pick it up from there.
Okay, yeah. So, like you said, I think hourly billing is nuts. It sort of hit me like an epiphany when I was working as the VP of a dev shop. We had 10 or so employees. We billed them all out by the hour. And it just occurred to me one day that if we were going to hire someone, we should hire someone who was most like our worst developer, our slowest developer, our most inexperienced developer, because they get a lower salary and we can bill them out at the same blended hourly rate as everyone else. And so the people who were really good and fast and didn't need to rework anything or rarely rework things, they had the highest salary because they were the best craftsperson at their job. So I was like, this doesn't seem right. Like I having hired people already at that place, I was always looking for the best. We were always looking for the best developer, the most competent, the fastest, all of that. And once that hit me, I was like, how could this be? It was obvious that it would be more profitable to hire junior developers, but I didn't want to work with a lot of junior developers. I wanted to work with people who were amazing. It took me weeks before I realized that hourly billing was the reason that was true. Because if we had fixed project rates of some sort, then our fastest, best developers would be a massive asset and it would make us very profitable. So I was just like, I was just stumped by that. I was like, well, what do we do? Because everybody bills by the hour. Everybody in our whole industry billed by the hour. Everyone I knew anyway. So yeah, so that was the original. That was my original sort of wake up call to hourly billing being crazy. And once I noticed that, then I started to notice, and then I said, well, if we switch to something that would make our best developers the most profitable developers, what else would that do for the business? And I started to see problems all across the organization, things that we had been wrestling with from day one of my time there, things like related to invoicing and just a whole bunch of things, compensation, bonusing, getting invoices out in arrears, and all of this stuff. And I was like, wow, if we just set fixed prices and invoice clients up front, like all of that would go away. And, but so that was where, that's really the answer. That was the big thing. That was probably like 2005.
Hmm. I think the other thing to this, or the other side of this, which you have spoken about as well, but I think that resonates with me a lot, which is that internally it just feels good to be on the client side, because I have been working with a WordPress developer, and when he sends me the timesheets, and he wants to operate by the hour, so when he sends me the timesheet, I know that okay, this has been a little bit manipulated, and it's funny that if he was charging me for the whole project, and even if that rate was higher than what he is quoting me right now, or what the invoice that he's sending, I would be
Mm,
okay with it because we have agreed on it. But now this feels as if there is this weird tension, that this weird tussle where I know that he is exaggerating the amount of time that he spent, and then he's a little worried about me catching that, and that just makes the whole relationship also weird.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I have an article from way back. That's one of the things that I talk about it as a trust fracture, where even if the developer is being 100% honest, there's just this thought like, well, this could be faked. It's the problem is the misalignment of the financial incentives. It's better for you if the developer is fast, and it's better for the developer if the developer is slow. So it creates this trust fracture where it's like, okay, are these really the hours? Like everything's like in perfect half hour increments. Like really, it's not. There was no like 7 minute increment, right? So I mean, believe me, I billed by the hour for years, and everybody had their own little fudge factor, and everybody felt like, oh well, I whatever, like, oh well, I a little bit under reported I worked 7 minutes longer than an hour last time, but my calendar makes it difficult for me to record a 7 minute increment. So I'll work 7 minutes less this next half hour. And then the numbers are all round numbers. And it's like, come on. So anyway, it creates all sorts of problems. I could list a dozen problems that it creates, but everyone listening has probably heard all of that before from
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
show.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe I would like to zoom in on those few weeks that you said, because even though you say it was an epiphany, it wasn't really an epiphany. I think because it stretched over a few days or weeks. So the way I see it is that on day one, it hit you that okay, there is a problem, and on day X, whatever that day is, you found a solution to it, which is hourly billing. So
Mm.
what was like the process of the struggle in between, like what all did you do to find the solution to this problem?
Right. I wouldn't say I had a particular process, but it was a familiar um, it was a familiar experience to me in the past. So like my whole job was like solving problems. So if somebody had a database situation, and I remember one time a few years previous where I had a this is going to be really boring, but there was a business case that the client needed represented in the database, and I was using FileMaker, which is like a lot more limitations than something like a SQL database. So I was like, how am I going to do this? And I didn't, I was just like a hacker basically. Wasn't trained in computer science or relational database design or anything. So I was just puzzling over it in the back of my mind. Like I'd be jogging, and this problem, I just couldn't let it go. And I'd be out running or something, and I'd just be thinking about it the whole time. And I remember uh, one time jogging, this is going to sound stupid to anybody that knows relational database design, but I didn't. And I came up with the idea for a join table, which might be meaningless to you. But I was like, oh, I need a table in between the two other tables to track the nature of the relationship between the two other entities. And it was like, there was no process to it. It was just this puzzle that I couldn't let go. It was the same with the hourly billing, where the paradox or the dilemma, maybe you would call it, was like, okay, we're going to hire someone. Who should we hire? Like, look for someone who's not that great. And I just couldn't know that. I was like, no, I just rejected that. But, at the same time, having been promoted to a management position, I was aware of everyone's salaries and the profitability of the company. And I obviously want to increase the profit. So there was this puzzle, and it was just in the back of my mind. And I was, I used to walk back. I lived like a mile from the office, and I used to walk back and forth to work. It probably happened while I was walking. That's usually where I think about stuff like the most effectively. I wouldn't say it was a process, but all of a sudden, the thing that strikes me about how long it took me, and I recall it as weeks of this background puzzling where I didn't question the hourly part at all. I was thinking of other, like completely other things like tracking and like how could we change the bonus structure and could we use the more experienced developers to train. I was doing all of these gymnastics to try and make it make sense. Like why I know we want to hire the best developers. I know that's true. I take that as a given. But that ruins our profitability. So how do I fix the profitability and continue? So then I was like, how can I use these other developers in better ways? And I was like, oh, well, maybe they speak at conferences and they'll bring in more clients, but still, we still have low profit margins. It doesn't matter how many clients we have, we'll have low profit margins. So I tried every way to think about it. And I didn't even, and it took a long time before I got down to the level of the billable hour, because it's such a fundamental assumption in the space. It took a long time for me to question it, and I know that's true with basically almost everyone I talk to, because they reject the idea like, well, what else would I do? That's the only fair way to charge, and all the same things that were in my head in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if there's a process, if there's a takeaway, I'd say like once you identify your problem, like don't let it go and walk a lot.
Yeah, I one of the things one of the so it, when I work with clients, one of the exercise that I ask them to go through is just ask them what pisses them off, what really frustrates them,
Mm-hmm.
because from whatever research I have done, all of these emerge because of two drastic emotions, or two opposite emotions. One is insane curiosity and the other is frustration or almost
Mm-hmm.
anger,
Mm-hmm.
where you see something is broken and then there is this emotional charge that wants you to fix it, and you have to lean into it. But that's the scary part, right? And I think there is you have to be a bit of a rebel to really question that, because like you said at the start of this, that the whole world was billing by the hour. Maybe the whole world, or almost the whole world, does it as of today as well. Of course, you're leading the change, but yeah, changing everyone is going to take maybe a few more Jonathan Starks. So, so you have this. I guess my question is, did you always have this sort of a rebellious nature? Or if I were to, like, call your high school teacher, English teacher today, and if I had to ask her that, hey, how was Jonathan as a student, would you really classify him as an obedient, nice, well behaved student? Or would she tell us that, hey, no, he was the annoying one who asked a lot of difficult questions? What kind of a kid were you?
Oh, that's interesting. The specific answer to the question is like all of my different teachers probably give you a different answer, because there were subjects I was much more interested in and ones I was totally bored by, and my behavior reflected that level of interest. Um, so I guess going down this rabbit hole a little bit more, probably my favorite class in high school was a philosophy class senior year, and I went to a Catholic high school, so it was pretty wild to have a philosophy class, which was sort of a-religious. And I loved that class. I loved that teacher. I was like probably everyone else thought I was the biggest brown noser teacher's pet, because I would like answer every question. I was like, or ask every question, and just like not. Yeah, I loved that class. And so I have a real strong interest in the sort of philosophical pursuits, I suppose. Never been really religious, but definitely very philosophical. So that was one thing. But then I had another class also senior year that I just about failed, which was pre-calculus, and that was strange because I was really good at math, and I had this block with calculus because I didn't understand the point of it. I didn't know what it was for. I do now, but I understood you could see what geometry was for. You could see what algebra was for. That all made sense. Like, okay, like I have problems in real life that I can use this as a tool to solve, but I didn't have any calculus problems in my real life. And my teacher was one of those kinds of teachers where I was like, I was very frustrated because then rote memorization doesn't work for me. I have to understand it or I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
remember it. So if I couldn't understand what this was for, I couldn't memorize it. I couldn't care less. There's other things I would have rather done. And so I asked her one time, I'm like, what is this for? And she's like, this is for your graduation. And if you don't pass it, you're not going to graduate. And I'm like, and I literally took my book and threw it on the floor and walked out. I was like, it was like, which was that was an extreme thing for me to do, even for me. But that's an example of how frustrated I was because I was used to being good at math and I couldn't make this make sense to me. I could not make calculus make sense to me. And I even years later, whenever I would run into a math teacher, I would ask them like, what is calculus for? And then finally one day someone was like, well, if you can't have a helicopter without calculus. And I was like, oh, okay. And like, that's the rabbit hole that I would have went down and that would have helped. Because if someone said, well, let's say you needed to figure out, I don't know, the area under a curve for the blade of a helicopter, like how would you do it? And I'd be like, Jesus, I don't know. And they'd be like, calculus. And I'd be like, oh, okay, now I really want to know how to do it. Because you know what I mean? Because there's
Yeah.
a problem I can't solve. I guess the recurring theme here is when I'm like a dog with a bone once I find an unsolvable problem. So, um, but yeah, I'll just sort of leave it there.
Cool. So going back to the journey, till now, till this point of time, you have only zeroed down on the problem, which is that okay, there is something
Yeah.
broken with our labeling. You're yet to arrive at the solution. So maybe talk about that journey, and also I'm very curious to know the time gap between the two, like you arriving at the problem, which I think is a very very crucial moment in this whole journey, and then all the way to you arriving at the solution. So you now know the old game which is broken, but you want to propose the new game, but you don't quite know that yet. So how long did it take you to get there, and what did the entire process look like?
Yeah, it's hard to remember. It was 20 years ago, but here's how I remember it. If somebody had more, if my boss from back then, Chris, might have better memory of it. But I would say it was something like I feel like it was summer when I had this realization, and it would have probably been summer of 2005. And around that time, I went to I was living in Atlanta. I'm from Rhode Island, but I was living in Atlanta with my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and we came back up to New England for a friend's wedding. And I was like, why don't we live here? I love it up here. I have a million friends up here. I didn't have that many friends in Atlanta. I love the weather, everything about. I was like, we should really move back. And so that was a thought that we would have been interested in moving back if there was some way to do that. We owned a house in Atlanta and everything. Um, so that was a characteristic of the situation. And I also had this epiphany, and I told my boss at the time, Chris, about it. I said, I explained it. And he was like, he understood logically what I was saying. He was like, but what would we do instead? And I remember saying, I don't know. So like
Mm-hmm.
to your point, like I didn't know what the solution was. I just knew what the problem was, and I wasn't even sure where to look. It was so not, and I had also ruled out fixed pricing because we had done that occasionally and got super burned, like totally regretted doing it. So I'm like, okay, fixed prices isn't it, but hourly billing is nuts. Um, then I was like, wow, we went to this wedding. Like, man, that was fun. We should really move back up here to Rhode Island. And then my girlfriend at the time got offered a job. There's this headhunter that was calling her all the time. She was like sort of a creative director type of person, and this headhunter had been calling her through the whole time we lived there. And he got her. Basically, she ended up getting a job at CVS, which is back in Rhode Island, and they were going to pay for us to move. And so it was like it sort of all fell into our lap. I feel like it was it might have been a 3-month period. It felt like a short period of time. Uh, and so I said, look, I said to my boss, I'm like, look, we're going to move. I've got this problem. I want to figure out how to solve this hourly billing thing. It was a whole combination of things. So I basically was going to leave, go solo. We're going to move. She was going to start a new job. We're going to buy a new house, sell the old house. So like a million things were going on right around that time. I think I've got the timeline about right. because I know I started Jonathan Stark Consulting Inc. on the incorporation date is like January 1st, 2006. We moved into this house in that summer. So it was right around that time. And I know when I found the solution, I found the answer, and I know exactly where I was, which was I don't know if it was a Barnes and Noble or a Borders, but it was one of those big bookstores in the mall in Providence. So we had already moved back, and I was already on my own. And I found Value Based Fees by Alan Weiss, who coincidentally also lives in Rhode Island. But it was just so weird because I was just, this is basically, I don't even think we had internet at home. We would have had internet at home, but the internet was not the thing that it is now.
Yeah.
And smartphones weren't a thing either. Like Wi-Fi was still new. So you still went to bookstores is what I'm saying. So just randomly we're in this bookstore. I was probably just killing time and just stumbled across this book, Value Based Fees. I'm like, never heard of that. It sounds like it has to do with pricing. And so I bought that. And like that book was my Bible for like 3 years. I just read that book over and over and over. And that was the answer. Like that was the answer. It's not like these days, I wouldn't say that's the only answer. There's a few different ways I think service professionals can price. And I think there's a number of, and in subcategories too. But for big project style engagements, it is the way to correctly price that kind of work profitably, and using your best developers is a good idea. But yeah, so I know that probably isn't super helpful to the listener, other than perhaps to share that it was a very sort of sloppy, messy transition. Lots of different things were happening at the same time for lots of different reasons. And, I worked out a deal with my previous boss, Chris, to take some clients with me, and we split the money. And because the clients were used to working with me and they wanted to stay with me. So that gave me a little bit of a sort of a ramp into, I didn't have to get clients from scratch cold. That would have been scary, but so that was great. He was always a super helpful guy.
Yeah, you can fact check this, but I do think there is like a missing part here, which is, and I think I've heard you speak about it, where you also went. I mean, of course, that book was helpful, but I'm pretty sure, or I believe it did not give you like the complete answer, and you also went on your own journey where you were exploring, and I think you were creating content on it as well. So maybe you missed out on that part. So could you talk about that a little bit?
I think when I started creating content on it, it was a couple of years later
Okay.
when when I had sort of, because the problem with value based fees or value pricing or whatever you want to call it, the problem with it is it's extremely unfamiliar.
Hmm.
So, and it's a 180-degree mindset shift from billing by the hour. So even though I got that book, I read the book, I thought I was doing what it said in the book. I wasn't really. I was still doing cost plus in my mind and giving basically really high fixed prices based on the cost. So like my plus was huge. And it was working because of value based concepts, because the value was there, and I would have just underbid it and left money on the table. So at first I was sort of doing it wrong. It probably took me 18 months before I really felt like I was, I kept being like, oh, I'd reread the book and be like, oh, I'm still making this one mistake, or I'm still scoping in the sales meeting, or I'm still thinking about hours too much when I'm setting the price. I'm not working backwards from the value. I'm still deciding what I'm going to do before I have a value or a price. So that took probably 18 months for me to sort of get down. And then, and the whole time I'm still in contact with all these friends I had from the hourly billing world. So when I was doing FileMaker, I had tons of friends. I'd go to the conference, and people all over the world. We stayed in touch over email and whatnot. And people were just asking me. And I gave a talk at the big FileMaker conference. There's like one big FileMaker conference every year, and I spoke at it and talked about a business topic, which was very unusual. Normally, it was always just technology, and that got a lot of people's attention. And then the Boston local FileMaker users group had me come up and give a talk, and there were like 40 people there, and I gave a talk about how I was running my business on a non-hourly model, because nobody likes, but almost nobody. Some people do like tracking their time, but almost nobody likes billing by the hour. So it's like it's a great villain. It's a great like monster to slay because no one likes it.
Yeah.
They just think it's the only way to do it. And what happened there was we were giving this talk. It was like at MIT or something like that. It might have been IBM building there. And we only had an hour or whatever, and we were still doing Q&A after I gave the presentation about like basically how I ran my business. And they had a ton of good questions that I didn't have good answers for
Mm-hmm.
because they had different situations. So like maybe somebody um, had a bunch of employees and I was just solo, or maybe somebody hadn't written a book and I had written a book, and they were like, well, how am I going to how am I going to justify these fees? And if they're higher than the hourly estimates. And so they had all these questions, and I'm like, and my answer to all of them was like, well, don't do it like that. It's like, well, I wouldn't do it like that. So just do it like me and it'll be fine. And I was like, that's lame. So I, we had to leave because somebody else was coming in to give a presentation. So I said to the group, I was like, I will write every Sunday night, I'll write a post for Monday morning, and for, a few weeks, I'll just take these questions, keep emailing me questions, and I'll think about it and try and give you answers. And so that might be what you're remembering, where
Yeah.
I had a few years under my belt at that time actually implementing it for myself. But this was my first serious attempt to teach it to anybody. And that's where that ended up, that series of blog posts plus some fresh ones ended up being the hourly billing is nuts book.
Yeah. I think what I find interesting about this is the exploration that, okay, like, a problem, you sort of know a solution but not quite, and then you go towards the ideal solution, or the best solution that you can think of for this problem. uh, One of the key enablers during this journey, I believe, is content creation. And maybe I'll love to hear about what you think, because yes, there is the client work where you get to practice what you're learning, and that is extremely important. On the other hand, there is also this inner exploration that happens through content creation. And for me, at least, the written word carries the most weightage when it comes to sort of peeling the onion layers, and like, really trying to understand what the hell you're actually trying to convey or
Yeah,
say.
right.
So was it the same for you? Did writing play a crucial role as well?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Like that's, I, when I was, before I started doing the writing, because I wasn't really, I might have had a half-assed blog where sometimes just like, not really, I might have had some kind of blog, but I wasn't writing, and then when I made this promise to this FileMaker group, then like every Monday I was writing, and it ended up being a lot of Mondays. And I was really like, really bad at explaining it. It's kind of like, it's almost like, uh, I'm not going to say I'm a natural at value based pricing. I certainly wasn't. But when you just get something, it's hard. It's like some people that know how to do something aren't the best people for teaching the thing. But I still had beginner's mind. I was still new to it enough. But it was like, there was a lot of stuff that I had a really hard time answering. So like anybody that, it's like I only knew how to do it in the extraordinarily specific context of my business. Solopreneur doing a very particular thing and having written a book on it and gets to speak at the conference every year and other conferences too. So like I didn't realize I had like a really good marketing game going, but I did. And so a lot of this stuff was just working for me by accident, where it would not have worked for other people who didn't have any kind of like, position in the marketplace, or didn't stand out in any way. So I was like, okay, um, yeah. So to answer your question specifically, 100%, like me writing is how I crystallize my thinking. And when you can't write it, or what you're writing is just drivel, you're just writing this, like, you don't know what you're saying. You're just typing. You're going all over the place, and it's really rambly and like lots of tangents and doesn't make any sense even when you read it back. It's like, all right, my thoughts on this are not organized. And that's a bad thing if I'm going to be, if I'm going to try and teach it to someone, because people were starting to ask me to coach them. Like it was not my idea to coach people. I had two different people from the FileMaker world that were like, could I pay you to like try and teach because I definitely want the outcomes that you're getting, but I don't see how I can get there from where I am. So maybe you could help me. And through the process of doing that, I was like, oh, wow, there are all of these pieces that I had in place that not everybody has in place. And the process of writing it down, and it felt like mapping out a territory. So like, and I just had this one path through the woods that I figured out, but that path wouldn't work for everyone because they weren't all starting in the same place I started in. So I had to map out the whole woods. And
Hmm.
so then that was just a long process of taking questions and working with people directly and saying like, okay, well, how could we make it work for you? And then once the whole thing was mapped out, it's sort of stupid because when you zoom way out from the map, it's like basic business stuff. But we're all technicians and we're all coming at it from such a non-entrepreneurial space that most of that stuff is just completely foreign or invisible to folks like us. And I mean technician in the sense of like E-Myth Revisited, Michael Gerber's book. There's basically three
Yeah.
personality types in business: entrepreneur, technician, and manager. And we're all technicians. And I still mostly work with all technicians. Like they're totally great at doing this technical thing, this craft that they do. So writing it out was totally transformative in terms of my ability to to teach it, but to even understand what the heck I was teaching. I mean, it was night and day, you know. So eventually, it went from that would have been. I mean, hourly billing is nuts. I didn't finally turn that into a book until like 2016. So that was like 10 years of me figuring this out on my own, trying to teach it to people in an ad hoc basis. And then, and writing sporadically. I was writing weekly for a while. Then I stopped doing that because I hated writing weekly. And then in 2016, when I launched that book, I started doing daily. So it got
And
even more intense.
until that time, were your software projects supporting you with regards to revenue? Was that
Yeah.
the only income? Okay.
Not the only income. So let's see. Over the course of that time, by the way, there's one of these user groups, the FileMaker user groups, interviewed me about a year ago about these sort of like 4 or 5 reinventions that I've done in sort of my business life, and that's on YouTube somewhere. We can put that in the show notes. It's like it might be interesting if people are interested in this particular question. But I went through a couple of I went through a phase from like FileMaker developer at the beginning to FileMaker web hybrid, and then in 2007 the iPhone was announced. So I was kind of doing yeah. So I was 2006. I was doing like FileMaker web projects because I had written a book about PHP and FileMaker, and there weren't a lot of FileMaker developers that also were web programmers. So there was like this specialization inside of a specialization for people that were getting outgrowing FileMaker, and they needed to. And the web was becoming like a big deal. So they were like, our clients need some stuff on a website. The data is all in FileMaker. It's too slow for our website. So what do we do? And so then for that first year, I was very hands-on coding. Um, 2006 for sure, doing FileMaker and web stuff and some MySQL, PHP, stuff like that. And then in 2007, early January, I think it was, the iPhone was announced. And I was like, that's what I'm doing from now on. I'm going to make websites for that thing.
Yeah.
And, and then the whole web community went through this big transition. And, myself and a handful of other people who I could practically name off the top of my head, um, started doing what ended up getting dubbed responsive web design by Ethan Marcotte. And so, yes. And so I'm still at that point, I started to switch more into advisory because I wrote a book about that, and that came out in 2010, and like January 2010, and that was very popular.
Hmm.
So it was, my timing was accidental, but it was accidentally perfect. And that was right around the time when enterprises were really getting serious about building, you know, fixing their websites so it didn't look like crap on an iPhone. And yeah, so I was getting hired by like all kinds of like brand, household name brand companies to advise their web teams about how to do responsive web design, basically. So it got very consultative. I was making good money, really good money, really good money. Yeah, started doing more advisory, month-long advisory retainers, like 10 grand a month. I'd have like 2 or 3 clients at the same time, and basically I would just keep up to date on the technology. And when they had questions, I'd answer them. I help their team, to make a decision about some sticky situation on their website or whatever. But yeah, so I was transitioning away from hands work into brains work and more advisory stuff throughout that time. And then even when the book came out in 2016, I still had retainer clients for a while after that, years.
Mm.
They were more mobile, technology focused, while I was doing sort of coaching stuff on the side.
So while you were testing these ideas through your writing, and also while through giving talks at different conferences, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
was there a specific instance where you faced like a tremendous amount of ridicule, or like a very hard pushback on this idea?
Yeah, there was one time early on when I used to say hourly billing is unethical,
Hmm.
and that people couldn't separate that. They took it, understandably. They took that to mean I was calling anybody who billed by the hour unethical, and that got everybody's attention. um, I remember getting a lot of crap about that. So and even though I think the practice is unethical, I mean, it's like the incentive is 100% mismatched.
Yeah.
So I could imagine other, it like the medical profession or something having a situation like that, or it's just so bad. So, but I was like, okay, I'll stop using that word because people stop listening when they feel like they're being insulted or they're being accused of something. So I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter if that's, that doesn't need to be the description. But I did get a lot of crap about that. It probably would have been on Twitter at the time, because I was a big Twitter user around 2006, 2007, all through up until 2012 or 2016. I probably just completely was off of Twitter. But yeah, I think that's where it would have happened, where people are just like, you're an asshole or whatever.
I think that's one of the copywriting principles as well, right? That you don't really blame them, you blame the path that they are on. And I think
Yeah,
what I have also learned as I work through my clients is that the villain is usually a misbelief that they have, and they have accepted that to be true just because it's a very common practice. And
right,
in your case, it was that the hourly billing, like that is the only way for me to succeed. That was a belief that they were carrying. And once you go and say, and by the way, I find a phrasing very like a punch in the face, or a slap on my face. It's nuts, right? So the copywriting is brilliant. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it surprises me, and the villain is usually surprising, because if they knew the villain already, then it wouldn't really be an aha moment for them. So
right.
it's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought about that before. So I think that is the moment that was coming up when you threw this phrase at them. Like from an external perspective, what I find insane and mind boggling is that you had this intense obsession over this particular problem, and you went on a rather long journey.
Hmm.
And yes, you are getting feedback with regards to responses and conversations, but there was almost no business impact or revenue impact till, let's say, 2016. uh, uh, I mean, let's pretend that is the truth. But so you could have been on what Seth Godin calls like the dip, or
Yeah,
it could have been a cul-de-sac. I think that's what, or a dead end basically. And
yeah.
all of this would have been for nothing, or even if it was, it wouldn't have led to any kind of business impact or revenue for you. So did you have any of these thoughts, any self doubts, and what sort of kept you going?
I guess, I mean, you use the word obsession, and I was obsessed with it. I get obsessed with things about every 10 years. I get obsessed with a new thing. And that was it, um, for that time period. And it was like, it carries you through, in the dip. I read it a long time ago. I'm going to paraphrase, correct me if I get it wrong, but it's kind of like, his premise is kind of like, if you're not interested in becoming like the best in the world at this thing, then quit.
Mhm.
And I'm probably overstating it a little bit, but early on, I found myself, I don't know where I came up with this, but it was probably when I redid my website where I started using this. I'm on a mission to rid the world of hourly billing, and like that's real. So even if I couldn't have made a business out of it, I'd probably still be writing about it. I don't
Wow.
know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say, but I certainly would have written a lot about it and certainly contributed. And, of course, over time, I found that I was not the only person who, and neither was Alan Weiss, the only person who ever thought of hourly billing as a problem for professional services. There's a bunch of others, the Vera Sage Institute, and Ron Baker, and Blair Enns, and David C. Baker, and the list goes on. So I sort of found all of these fellow travelers along the way. And in theory, I could have been like, oh, I'll let them do it, right? You just like, but I liked contributing to the mission, so I kept doing it, and demand sort of presented itself. So like people were interested, so there were just ways to monetize it so that I could keep doing it and not have to have a side gig just so I could, rail against hourly billing. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. The one of the fears that comes up is picking the one idea
mm-hmm,
for your brand, or if you want to talk in terms of Ditcherville lingo, then finding the sun to your solar system.
mm-hmm,
And one challenge is that it's not that they don't have ideas, it's that they have maybe two, three, four ideas. So in the solar system content model that you have talked about, there is the sun, which is the core idea, and then you have the planets which are supporting the core idea, the pillars of the core idea.
mm-hmm.
So my question is, you could have chosen, for example, something like, I don't know, positioning, because you talk a lot about
Yeah.
positioning.
Mm-hmm.
You could have chosen, I don't know, daily publishing, right? So there are
Right.
multiple things that you could have chosen, but you went with this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it almost doesn't matter what you think, because you're anyway going to talk about these things, so it's anyway going to be like a, it's not as important, like choosing the right sun? Or do you think it is? And if it is, then how do you pick this one idea? How do you decide based on these multiple two, three? Because this could be my son. No, this could be my son. How do you navigate through
Yeah.
that?
So that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up because it's not like I decided. In fact, I did what you just said, which was like, I had all these things that were, from going back in the story to from when I was blogging every week to answer questions from that user group presentation. I knew these were all components. So things like writing a book, things like having well, wouldn't have been a podcast back then, but speaking at conferences, things like having this why conversation thing, like the way to do a sales interview. I knew these were all important pieces, and so I wrote about them, but it wasn't inherently obvious to a reader how they fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, originally I thought my son, I wouldn't have called it that at the time, but I thought my main thing was value-based pricing. Thought that was my main thing to talk about. And then for a little while, I thought my main thing to talk about was positioning, because that's critically important. And then for a while, I thought my main thing to talk about was expensive problems, finding a demand, basically finding like something that people wanted to write you a check for. But then when I would sort of like, and this is not public, this is all just in my mind, because I felt like I felt like the content, it was connected in my head, but it didn't feel like it was coming across as connected, if you see what I mean, to the
Yeah.
readers. It just seemed, it seemed like it was kind of random. Like I'd write about sales call one day and outbound another day, and, self-publishing another day. It's like, yeah, they're all something that you might want to do, but how are they connected? And whenever I would sort of think I had a central organizing theme or an umbrella principle under which everything contributed, I'd find myself writing about a planet that was not under, like the main thing that happened was I think I was writing the freelancer's roadmap, and I found myself, like, I keep almost apologizing for talking about productized services, because I bring
Mm-hmm.
up productized services and I talk about it a lot in that book. And I was like, well, this isn't really value pricing, but, or this really isn't value pricing, or like, this isn't really
uh,
value pricing. And I'm like, okay, so the value pricing cannot be the central theme because I'm talking about all these other things. And so it ended up that the central theme was stop trading time for money, ditch hourly billing. Like that ended up being the central theme. And I didn't even think of that. I was on a pod, I was getting interviewed, or I was interviewing, I was talking to Joel Pilger on one of our shows, and he was telling the story about, um, when someone asks you, what do you do? It's like a really common question. What do you do? He goes, you don't want to answer, I'm a something, something, something. You want to say, I'm the something, something, something. And I was like, oh, that's such a good trick. And he was like, so what would you be the one and only of? Like don't be just one of many, be the one and only. And I'm like, I'm probably the ditching hourly guy. And I was just like, oh, geez, I probably am. And then we Googled it, and I was like 2 full pages of Google search results. So I was like, that's it. I guess that's it. And everything, all the planets did fit in that solar system around that particular sun. So I was like, okay. And so the basic concept is it's like how to scale a solo business without hiring. It's like, how do you do it? You have to do all of these planets. Like you have to do all the planets in the
yeah.
solar system to like scale up that business. Otherwise you're going to have you're just going to hire, bill out their time, mark up their time, and bill them out. And that was just not a path for me, and it's not a path for a lot of people. So anyhow, that ended up being the central theme: ditch hourly billing.
That sounds like a beautiful moment when everything came together and clicked. I've had a few of those, and yeah, they feel quite nice.
Yeah.
Uh, so now I don't think it is maybe that novel a concept. I mean, at least a few people are talking about it. I don't know if you have any other observations. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel, hey, what the hell, my idea is being stolen? Or do you feel, because it's also human to feel insecure about your ideas, right? So how do you react when someone talks about, hey, hourly billing is not the right way to price him, or how do you react to it?
I mean, I feel like the mission's working if more people are doing that. So, and it's not like I invented. I mean, maybe I've had a couple of original ideas, but now that I knew what area to look in, like Alan Weiss, of course, is a huge influence on me. I even did mentoring with him for a while. I don't remember what year it was, but it was maybe 2006. But other, Michael Port had a real game changing book for me called Book Yourself Solid. There's like I'm building on top of other people's ideas. Harry Brown, The Secret of Selling Anything, amazing book.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, the E Myth, all very eye opening book. Not really for service businesses per se, is more like the examples are like bakeries and stuff. But I'm building on top of ideas that tons of other people have. So it's not a honestly not a whole lot of original thought. It's more like original metaphors and original ways of framing it. And I'm the only one I can think of that specifically targets this segment of the audience, like people who don't want to have an empire, they don't want to have 50 employees or 500 employees. I don't know a lot of people who are targeting soloists with this kind of message. So there's certainly, I mean, I feel like I'm not parroting anybody, but when someone parrots me, there's levels to it. Like if someone is clearly not an original thinker and is just, selling a PDF of my book on some, Chinese website, like, okay, that doesn't make me feel too good. I mean, they're spreading the message, I guess, but it does feel like I'm ripped off. Um, but generally speaking, it's like, yeah, the whole idea is to share the message and make a difference. Like it's like if it said this guy killed hourly billing on my tombstone, I'd be pretty happy.
It's not a trait possessed by everyone, Jonathan. So uh, yeah, it's not easy always to be in this what we call the abundance mindset. So yeah, I find it fascinating. I think as we move towards wrapping this up, I think I have two more questions. The first one being that there are a few thought leaders who keep on reinventing themselves. I think Seth Godin is kind of a freak. He has this one idea, he writes about it, and then he goes to the next one. And then there is someone like you, let's say, who rests on one idea, builds a brand business around it, has a revenue feeding the idea. So I think what I'm trying to ask is there going to be some other idea? Hourly billing is nuts part two. Do
Hmm.
you feel the need to reinvent yourself at some point of time to go into an adjacent, have you thought about it at all?
Yeah, sure. Yes, definitely. So there are things that come up in coaching that are sort of coaching specific. Um, I don't want to say challenges. I don't want to say black boxes, but like, I guess they're challenges. So like there are things that people wrestle with in, okay, so let me back up. So like I'll be doing one-on-one coaching with someone,
Mm-hmm.
and or even group coaching, and there's certain kinds of blocks. That's the word, like blocks that people have that are sort of preventing them from making progress, that are not things that I'm any good at. So like a lot of sort of, they're psychological, but I mean more like emotional blocks. I'm not great with those. It's like traditional like life coaching skills stuff. That's not my strong suit. You will never hear me talk about leadership. I
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about leadership. I don't talk about mental blocks like life coaching type stuff. Um, I never talk about, almost never talk about like abundance mindset. I don't know how to help someone switch from like a poverty mindset to an abundance mindset. I don't know how to help someone switch from being not confident to confident. They're like, so there are things like that where they are planets that could exist in my solar system and maybe would make me a little bit better in my delivery of my coaching services. But I don't think I'm ever going to write a book about it. But there are sort of these other planets that I see forming in the solar system. Like there's one around productivity that I think is a pretty important one.
Mm-hmm.
That that once you do switch off of hourly billing, all of a sudden productivity becomes fantastically important, because every minute you save is your minute. It's like making money. Like that's how you increase your profits, is by doing things faster without decreasing the quality. So things like when you hear me talk about SOPs and automation and, ruthlessly cutting out unimportant stuff and just not doing it, instead of spending all your time doing stuff that's not really moving the needle, um, just ways to create leverage inside of a solo business becomes super important. So that I see that sort of planet starting to form. That's becoming, I'm finding myself more interested in that. And of course, AI figures into this, because that can be a huge productivity increase for soloists. It's like amazing. It can be amazing. So that feels like if I was going to write another book, it could be that. Um, yeah, it could be around productivity. So yeah, I do see, because the other stuff, I mean, the map is pretty well mapped out. I've fleshed out the map of the small territory that I put a boundary line around. I've pretty well mapped that out. So most of the time, I'm just coming up with new ways to say the same thing, to make it land for a different kind of person coming from a different place. Um, but where does the new stuff? What's my next obsession? Might be your question. I don't think productivity is my obsession, but I'm due for a new obsession. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, Cal Newport and David Allen should watch out because Jonathan's coming. Uh, so I think the last question that I have, Jonathan, is like what would your advice be for someone who wants to differentiate, who wants to stand for something, uh, doesn't know because it's all like mess inside their head right now.
Hmm.
And so what's the first step that they should take? And I would maybe preface your answer with something from my own experience, which is that all of this might feel intimidating because, hey, I don't want to spend whatever 5 6 7 8 years that Jonathan spent in doing all of this. uh, I don't want to be the next Simon Sinek or whatever, Seth Godin or Jonathan. I am just at step one right now. But
Hmm.
and I had this question too, but from whatever evidence that I'm gathering from my clients and also personally, is that even if it's a sales call, and if you have an opinion, if you have a point of view, a big idea, if you have original thoughts, it plays a huge role. Like, you can almost see the switch flip when you're talking to someone, when they see, okay, this guy thinks things differently. Even the way you draft your warm outreach message, because I know you teach about positioning statements, and I'm going to butcher it right now, but it has that, you do this for, you solve this problem for this particular set of an audience or this particular demographic. And then there's the next part, which is unlike my competitors, blank. And
Hmm.
figuring out that blank is super important. And I think what I'm trying to get at is, it doesn't have to be the best selling book. It can just be a simple conversation which can be hugely impacted, positively impacted by you having an opinion and by you having a big idea. That's what my experience tells me. So uh, that was my rant. But yeah, with all that being said, what message do you have for someone who's starting out?
I mean, for someone who's starting out, what you mean specifically? Someone who's starting out as sort of solo expertise, like maybe they just left corporate and now they're going to hang out their own shingle type of starting out, or do you mean starting out with thought leadership?
Yeah, maybe specifically I would say they have been in the business. I mean, they have been, let's say, done a full-time job for a while, and then they have transitioned to consulting.
Hmm.
They have worked, they have clients, they're not really hungry per se, but they're overly dependent on referrals, want to get crisper into
Yeah.
positioning, want to be or want to attract leads organically through their ideas. So how do you transition from that stage to, let's say, someone who gets those leads
Yeah.
effortlessly?
So you almost, I won't couch it. I'll just say it directly and you can insert probablys and usuallys and all that sort of thing. But you have to stand out. If you aren't different than what your buyers see as your competitors, you will have price competition. You will be in a race to zero on price. You have to be meaningfully different to your ideal buyers, or you're not gonna grow in the way that I advise, which is to be able to deliver more value and therefore set higher prices without increasing your costs. So you got to stand out. The next obvious question is, well, how do I stand out? And it's like, well, a really straightforward way to do it is to pick a really specific target market because almost everybody wants to be a generalist. And if you're the one that focuses on, whatever, single mothers over 30 who are looking to get into corporate America, I don't know, you're going to be the only one, right? Or whatever your thing is. So that's a good starting point because even if you don't have a big idea yet, like maybe you know what you're doing, like you're good at your craft, you know how to do it. It's like pick someone specific to help. And if you can't, and if you've got to, look at your past clients, you've got all of these different kinds of clients, and you're like, well, I helped all of them. I could help. I could have helped all. I can help any of them like that in the future, and other kinds. It's like, and you have no preference, all else being equal. Well, then pick the one that has the most money. So then it's like if you don't care who you work with, and you look at your past clients, and there's one that had a ton of buying power, and you did a really good job for, well, then just go after them in your marketing, specialize in them for 6 months or a year and see what happens. You might find out that you hate it and it was a mistake, but you're still going to be making money while you're doing it. Go after those kinds of clients. um, so there's that sort of client centric way to stand out, which is just by focusing on an audience that is getting underserved by the generalists out there.
Mhm.
And the other way, and you can do both of these at the same time, is I like your approach where you like, what are the things, what are your contrarian ideas? What's your weird world? You like be weird, like be different, like have a different thought about the way that professional services should charge for their expertise, like, or have a different thought about how people should position themselves in social media or how people, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you think everybody's doing it wrong with this particular thing, or there's something that drives you crazy almost to the point of anger, or there's some problem that you're obsessed with solving, then detect that, like notice that when those things happen and you have like this, yeah, contrarian worldview, big idea, mission, something different, right? And you just like write them down, at least track them when they occur to you. It'll probably be in a client call. You're in a normal client call, and like they bring something up, and then you realize that they talk that chaps your ass, that all the clients do this. It drives me crazy. All the clients do this. Well, write that down. Like notice that, capture it, because you'll forget it later. So I think the combination of, it's my etch a sketch model. Like as you're getting, as you're zooming in and out of a focus on who you want to help, you can zoom up and down on what you want to help them with.
Mhm.
So like, what is the problem you're solving for? Or like, what are the skills and expertise? What's the stuff about you that you're bringing to the mix, and how specific are those? And how specific is the kind of person you want to work with? And And I wish there was a silver bullet, or I could just wave a magic wand. Like somebody pays me 10 grand and I wave a magic wand and here's your positioning. It doesn't work like that. So you have to iterate towards it, and it can take time for it to kind of reveal itself to you. But when it does, you're like, yes. Like you can feel the click, so it does eventually reveal itself if you keep after it long enough. But make money in the meantime. It's not like you're working for free in the meantime.
Hmm. Cool.
So
I
that
think
was a really long answer, but
no, it's helpful, and I think this is a good place to end. So I'm gonna pick up the imaginary interviewer hat, place it on you again, and yeah, over to you.
cool. Great. Well, this was a pleasure. Thanks so much for suggesting. We probably should do it periodically.
Yep, yep.
That'd be great.
This was fun and very enlightening. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Pranav. Where can people find out more about what you're doing with your big idea services?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is pranavkale.com, which is pranavkale.com, and there they can sign up for my email newsletter.
Awesome. Great. Check it out, folks. It's good stuff. All right. So, yeah, now I got to put the host hat back on, right? And remember the ending of the show. All right, folks. That's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly.